Hello everyone, welcome to a quick bonus episode of the Magic Arena Run. Today we're going to take a look back at Magic's history and whatnot. I figured it's 2020. I haven't been making that many videos recently. I don't really have that much time, but I do have time for quick 10-minute blurbs or something. So with that in mind, it's 2020 and let's take a look at a bunch of cards that actually have the word 20 or the number 20 on them. Now, caveat, this is top 10, but my criteria for this is not power level, though some of it would be recommended. In fact, you could say that some of the cards here might be the worst cards in the list, so it's probably more like sometimes it's a top 5, bottom 5, depending on the category I come up with. But I figured that these are the top 10 more interesting cards in the list. Basically, if I have something good to talk about it, it will make the list. There are a few cards that I did come up with. Some of them are really good. Like for example, Shell Dock Isle is Shell Dock Isle was a card back in Lorwyn block. It was pretty good in Vintage, Vintage Cube, Legacy Cube. It's also very good in at the format at the time. Unfortunately, there was really nothing to talk about it, so that's one card that didn't quite make the cut on this list. That said, let's take a look at some of the cards that were interesting, and I have something to talk about. That said, there is one card that didn't quite make it there. So when I did the search, I did a search first for the word 20, then I did the search for the number 20. Now, this one's quite interesting. You'll normally see the number because the number 20 is so ubiquitous. It's usually the life total. It's the life total you start with in almost every format, and it's about the halfway point of a limited deck. It's about 1/3 the way of a constructed deck usually. So the number 20 is pretty much ubiquitous to game winning, or at the very least, it's ubiquitous to trying to stay alive or getting back to your original point. That said, here we have a card from Unhinged. It's called Now I Know My ABCs. This is a good you win the game card. It's actually very interesting. You basically have to look through the card name to see if all 20 of all your cards, see if all 26 letters come up here. At least K is one of the harder ones to come up, so you're pretty much you have to look for X. You're pretty much looking for Z. Z's one of the hardest ones, though. I guess if you probably want to pair this with white, you want to look for Zealots. X, you want to look for cards with EX in it. Q would be really hard, though. So you're looking for words like acquire or quiet. Not too hard. Now this quite didn't make the list because English alphabet has more than 20 letters, but it did show up in the search, and I figured this one's quite interesting. Also, shout outs to the flavor text. It has all the letters on it. Good job, Wizards. So let's actually go to our real number 10, and this would be the very first card in Magic's history to reference the number 20. So here we have Rebirth. It's a card from Legends. It's a 6 mana, so it's basically 3 generic, 3 green sorcery. This card is so old it heralds back to the day when we actually had anti as a game mechanic. So this card basically reset your life total to 20. In fact, it resets every player's life total to 20 unless you actually had more than 20 life. You can choose not to. But if you choose to take the reset, you have to ante an additional card. And for 6 mana, this was really, really bad. It is a rare though also, so it actually feels even worse. But it's a nice piece of Magic's history. We come a long way. Remember back in the day when green was the worst color and all that stuff. So yeah, this one kept the player alive. It also kept your opponent alive, so you were prolonging your kitchen table game. Fun stuff back in the day. Number 9, this one was this one I encountered when I came back to playing Magic. I took a break a long time, then I came back around the original Mirrodin block, and I kind of opened one of these as my first take into Darksteel, so this one's a bit more memorable for me. But this one is interesting. It's a win condition that very hard to remove. You need an exile effect. You can also bounce it to just restart the clock, I guess. Basically, what happened was you play this on turn 4, then 20 turns later, you win the game. And perhaps if the format was so glacially slow, you could win with this one. But unfortunately, this had the worst fortune of coming out in a standard format where you pretty much won within your first 3 or 4 turns. This was back in the days of Affinity. So it's a little bit better now. We have Proliferate, but no one still plays this deck. You're actually better off with a more recent print of like Helix, Pinnacle, and whatnot. But number 9, it's actually very interesting, but at least it did showcase the set mechanic of the time, Indestructible. Number 8, this one's also a piece of history because this came out in Shards of Alara block. This is Lich's Mirror. It's a 5 generic mana artifact. If you would lose the game, instead you shuffle your hand, your graveyard, and all permanents you own into your library. You draw 7 cards. Your life total becomes 20. So you start yourself back at turn 0. This thing gets shuffled back also, so you could kind of save yourself again. It doesn't set your opponent back though, so your board state is... You've gone back to a clean board state, but your opponent probably has a ton of permanents in play at this time, so... And this was also the time when the mythic rarity was first introduced. So this was the worst possible mythic rare to open. It was the one that you felt bad the most, but that said, it's not like people didn't try to break this. Actually, in Vintage, there seems to be this mini combo with Channel. That was a sorcery for 2 green. Basically, you cast it. It gave you like it gave you an effect that you can use up to the end of turn, where you can pay 1 life to generate 1 colorless mana. So with Lich's Mirror, you can drain your entire life and you start back with a full grip of 7 cards. You start back with 20. If you happen to like what you see, like perhaps you got into a Lich's Mirror again, you can cast that again, drain your life down, reshuffle again. You would eventually be able to cast something really big, like say, typically it's a Fireball, or you could cast one of the big Eldrazi. And if you still had Lich's Mirror again, you can cast it again. So it's a decent combo. It's a horrible combo at that, because essentially it's in Vintage, so there's literally only 1 copy of Channel available. If you lost that copy or you never draw the copy, you're never gonna win with this one. But that said, sometimes the very worst can still be okay. I guess if you're creative enough or crazy enough or whatnot. So that's Lich's Mirror. Then number 7, shared between 2, but technically only 1 Planeswalker makes the slot. It's Jace. Now, in his first outing, the original Jace Beleren from Lorwyn block, it's 3 mana, so 1 blue. His people usually played him for the first 2 abilities. Either everyone draws a card or you just draw a card for yourself. Most of the time, people will just use this as a 3 mana, draw 3 cards, or 3 mana, draw cards, absorb a little damage and whatnot. He does have the ultimate of milling the top 20 cards of a player's library, and he gets to repeat again in his much later iteration for Jace Memory Adept, costing 5 mana, so 3 blue. Much weaker, much less exciting. In fact, this one could be argued to be one of the worst Jaces in the list, perhaps even the worst. But his ultimate, any number of target players can draw 20 cards, so you draw 20, your opponent draws 20. If you got a good engine, you can get around with this. Sad to say, nobody really played either of these two ultimates, but he does have a place in history. He's the only planeswalker to actually use the number 20. Jace likes large numbers. Guess we can be looking forward to Jace Beleren Match Professor anytime soon. I probably crossover with Niv Mizzet and whatnot. Now, number 6, this one came from Unstable, the latest unset. It's the Sword of Dungeons and Dragons. This one's, well, not only did this make it into Unstable, this was also a promo for one of the conventions as well. So it's a 3-mana equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from rogues and from clerics. Okay, very interesting protection. And whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to player, you get to create a 4/4 gold. Well, remember, this is unstable, so you get the dragon creature token with flying, and you get to roll a d20. If you land a critical hit, that's rolling a 20. You get to make another gold dragon token, and you get to roll again. Now, so the odds of actually hitting the critical is 5%. Then you get a lot of diminishing returns onwards, but at least you got one from the get-go. So getting a second one would be absolute bonkers. Very good stuff. The interesting thing about this card is this card shows up in both searches. Like if I search for the number 20, you get to roll a 20 here. If I search for the word 20, it spells out that it's a 20-sided die. Well, because not everyone reads D&D speak, so you have to spell out what the D20 is. Also interesting, it's the only sword that features a mace, Morningstar actually. So it's kind of weird, but it's a nod to the cleric half, I suppose. And you also take a look at the pommel. It's actually it's a D20. You look at the hilt. Compare it to the logo of Dungeons and Dragons. So nice flavor all throughout. Very interesting card. I'm not really limiting this to black border or unstables and official release, but it's not a tournament playable release. I'm not gonna limit myself that way, so I'm gonna be showing cards from all over. This is not the last card that's stuck there. So let's move on. Now here's also another triefer. This one is let's start in order. We have Battle of Wits in the back. It's 3 generic and 2 blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 200 or more cards in your library, you win the game. Okay, so this one only showed up because when I searched for 20, there's literally a 2-0. There just happens to be another 0. Then in the next set, Torment, they came Mortal Kombat. So it's 2 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if 20 or more creature cards are in your graveyard, you win the game. Then the next set after that, Judgment. So we had Epic Struggle. So it's 2 green. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more creatures, you win the game. So Odyssey Block had this interesting thing where they had a cycle of you win the game enchantments. Now, the reason you don't see the white one is because that one actually needed 50 life. Yes, that one needed 50. Felidar Sovereign needed 40. Then you didn't see the red one because you needed to win 10 coin flips. Well, at least you didn't have to win 10 coin flips in a row. That would be absurd. But that's why those two didn't make the cut. These 3 made the cut because they all reference 20 in some form or another. Okay, Battle of Wits is a bit cheating, but I want to highlight the entire... I wanted to highlight the entire Odyssey block this way. People keep talking about Battle of Wits, especially in Arena, when you see people with the 250 card decks. It's as if this card existed. It'd be funny if they reprint Battle of Wits now. It will actually validate some of these people playing... Validate the people playing 250 card decks in Arena. Mortal Kombat. It is actually easy to... Well, actually, no. At first glance, it looks easy because this was the block where we had Threshold, we had Flashback, we had Madness and whatnot. So there's a lot of discarding going on. Unfortunately, they also had a lot of exile effects from the graveyard as well. So getting 20 or more creature cards in your graveyard was not easy. And by the time we get down much later in the years, we Wizards printed original Ravnica and the dredge mechanics, so this card was not necessary anymore. Epic Struggle was a little bit easier to get to because this was also the format where green had a lot of token makers. Well, there's Roar of the Worm and whatnot, but they also had squirrels, and more squirrels. Squirrel Nest came from here. Some of the instants with flashback that made squirrels came from here as well. Ironically, Deranged Hermit did not come from here. It came from a much earlier set. One of the sets in Urza block. But that would have made it here and extended also. So actually getting 20 or more creatures would have been possible, though I'm pretty sure your opponent would know what you're up to, and having a lot of squishy 1/1s wasn't that great. But that said, that's the Odyssey block enchantments, not number 5. And getting to something a little even more obscure. This one's more the recent version of obscure. This one's Pure Steel Angel. This one's only from the convention version of the mystery boosters, and it's the only one that actually references the number 20. Now, generally, you can divide the cards that reference number 20 into 2 categories. The cards that just give you 20 life or reset your life total, essentially keeps you alive from a game state where you're probably gonna lose. And there's the ones that just win you the game. This one doesn't quite win you the game, but it does a very good job at keeping you from losing the game. That said, multiple emblems don't work that well. Basically, all of the emblems will get triggered, so your life total will become 20, then your life total will become 20. You'll have to shuffle your graveyard twice, and you'll lose all the emblems that way. But it's a flying indestructible 4/4, so not too bad. Would I rather have Platinum Angel over this? Platinum Angel is probably still better. It just kept you from outright losing the game. Although if it gets removed, you would have lost the game more or less immediately. This one, even if Pure Steel Angel gets removed, you would not lose the game. In fact, your life total would be pristine. You would not have any poison counters, and you would not, and your library is back to normal. Actually, that's probably the better part. Shuffling everything back, unless you're into graveyard shenanigans, this was pretty good. That said, it's not for constructed play, as written on the card here, and otherwise it would have been very interesting. But that said, goes to show that we will always have a spot for the number 20. So this year was probably the best time to reference all this. Okay, number 3. This was, at the time of its printing, was the only card to make a 20/20 creature. This would be referenced again. Much later in Modern Horizons as in Maritlage's Slumber. Although that one was a lot harder to trigger. This one was the worst land. This one highlighted all the bad things of ancient design, or ancient design back in the days. Essentially, what happened was we actually printed lands back in the day that you did not tap for mana. So this one, well, it's essentially a free spell, but this one's not even a free spell. Basically, you put it into play, then you have to spend a total. It came to play with 10 ice counters, so you'd have to spend 3 mana to remove an ice counter. So you had to spend a total of 30 mana to get yourself a 20/20 legendary flying indestructible creature. So that's how you broke out the big bad beast called Maritlage. It only got better much later. In original Zendikar, that was like what, 4 years? Kind of like 4 years later. It would only get better than when they came out with Vampire Hexmage. It was for 2 black mana, sacrifice. It was a vampire that you sacrifice to remove all counters from target permanents. So, boom, instant 20/20. In fact, it was that combo that put the spotlight on Dark Depths again. And much later in the... Okay, we've returned to Ravnica 3 times. So, in Return to Ravnica, or at least in that block, we had the card called Thespian Stage. So, it came into play as a land that produced colorless mana, but you can pay a little, but you can pay some mana to have it copy another land on the battlefield. It didn't come into play as that land, so you would play that, you would copy Dark Depths, and because it did not have any ice counters to begin with, because it was came into play as something else, you'd copy Dark Depths, you sacrifice the original Dark Depths to state-based effects. Then you would have the ability would trigger. You get to sacrifice this. Boom! Also an instant 20/20. So that's why Dark Depths is usually banned, if I'm not mistaken, in Modern. But otherwise, yeah, it goes to show that sometimes it just takes a few more years for cards to get really good. Unlike, say, Darksteel Reactor, that one's still not good. Number 2, this one is the playable version of a card with the number 20. It's Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. Sure, it costs 10 mana, but it has exile 2 target permanents as a cast trigger, so that's very good. It's indestructible by itself, and whenever it attacks, your defending player exiles the top 20 cards of his or her library. So generally, 2 attacks the opponent's library goes bye-bye, unless your opponent's playing Battle of Wits. And if you can hear my dogs barking, that's because my mom just came home and they're very excited already. That said, this one is the best in line, and a few interesting tidbits about this. Sure, there are a lot of 10s, but if you add them up, you got 20. So like 10 plus 10 is 20. You got the reference to top 20 cards. And 10 in the mana cost times 2 permanents, that's also 20. So there you go. Now I'm gonna pause this video a little bit so before we get to number 1, so I can let my dogs finish barking. Actually, gonna let them out right now. See you soon. And then let's see. Anyone want to take a guess at what number 1 is? Well, actually, if you know your Magic history, this one would have been easy. Number 1, this one's a card from Ice Age, Illusions of Grandeur. It's a quirky enchantment. It's 4 mana, 3 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 20 life. So, actually not too bad for 4 mana. However, when it leaves the battlefield, you lose 20 life. And it also has some old ability of cumulative upkeep, where every upkeep you would have. Okay, so every upkeep you would put an age counter on this enchantment, and then you would have to pay the cost listed times the number of age counters. So on your next upkeep, there's one age counter. You have to pay 2 generic mana. On the next upkeep, there'd now be 2 age counters. You'd have to pay 4 generic mana. So it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Eventually, you run out of mana, so you lose the 20 life. So So I was saying that on one category, it's the worst way. It's the worst version of 20 because it just kept you alive and it also killed you at the same time. But in a few more sets, like actually 4 years later, Urza's Destiny would come out. They would print the card Donate, where you can give a permanent to someone. Now, why would anyone want to do that, you say? Well, some people figured out that this was a good combo. And actually, more recently, we would have printed Harmless Offering, which did the same thing except in a different color. So with the right cards, you can turn the worst way to keep yourself alive into the best way into a good way to kill your opponent. So and Illusions Donate was it's actually one of the typical. It's not exactly a top tier deck in Legacy nowadays, but it had its place in history. It had its place in Extended, if I'm not mistaken. And that's pretty much the picture of history. So there you go. 10 cards with the number. 10 categories of cards with the number 20. I think I've actually listed about 13 cards all in all. But oh well, it's a free for all. It's a nice way to greet the year 2020. And that's it for this quick bonus episode. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications and whatnot. Also, check out my regular gaming content. How often will I be able to do this? Probably not too often. I'll probably see once a month. that gives me time to think of interesting categories. In fact, if you have categories of your own that you'd like to suggest, please come up with them, and I might even actually make a poll for it and whatnot. That said, thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you guys again next time. Take care and God bless everyone.